Inside my head, or inside my brain, is that part of me which keeps me sane, which helps discern between right and wrong and other things I'm gonna talk about in this song. It's time for the people to know, so now I tell them what goes on in my cerebrum and my cerebellum, the thought process that helps me get dressed, get up, and go to sleep.
Welcome back to the mental weight room, where we train the mind like we train the body. I'm your host and mental performance coach, Antoinette Datoc, and today we're diving deep with a guest who lives at the intersection of high-level sport and elite mindset. Elliot Cox is a certified mental performance consultant who currently works in professional baseball with the Tampa Bay Rays. His experience includes time at IMG Academy, where he supports athletes as well as their parents, teachers, and coaches. A former college athlete himself, Elliot has built a career helping athletes and other high performers gain that elusive competitive edge between the ears. Elliot, thank you for joining me today. I know you're busy.
Hey, yeah, of course. No, I'm definitely my pleasure. Excited to get into the conversation.
All right, Elliot, take us back a bit. What led you into the world of mental performance consulting?
When I was an athlete at the collegiate level, it was something that I definitely needed. I had dealt with various pressures and injuries and things that kind of came across in my athletic career that I think working with a mental performance consultant would have helped me tremendously. I hope. I can't sit here
Yeah.
and say it would work for sure, just because I was younger and probably a little hard-headed than I am now. But that's sort of kind of the reason and that I did get into this work. Now, I didn't go directly out of undergrad into the mental performance space. I did work at a corporate 500 company. The route that I wanted to take or was thinking about taking was industrial organizational psych.
Oh,
So
okay.
I got a job at a company as a customer and employee research specialist, helping out
Okay.
with that side of things. Quickly realized that life behind a desk just wasn't quite for me.
How did you make that shift from industrial and organizational psychology? Like, what was the pivoting point that you said, okay, I want to go back to school and study applied sports psychology? What was that turning point?
Yeah, it was always in the back of my head, something that I wanted to do. But through the company that I worked for, I was fortunate enough to be a part of a leadership development program. And the target audience was managers who led other managers. So it's kind of that second level
Okay.
of management.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there was a lot of really high level people in the company. And I was in rooms with people that were in the company longer than I'd been alive at that point.
Yeah.
Which was really, really, really interesting. But it didn't take long for them to realize how much I cared about this kind of stuff and how much passion I had towards, leadership and support and things like that. Unfortunately, that was
Yeah.
only like once a month out of and the rest of the month was spent behind a desk on a spreadsheet, kind of typing away. So
Yeah.
it wasn't quite
No.
enough. I had this moment, and I was like, all right, like I want to do this more. I want this to be kind of my whole job, and I knew about sports psychology, mental performance. A little bit. I didn't know a ton. So I talked to a lot of grad students and I found one program and I was like, all right, this is it. And I only applied
Yeah.
to one and I got in, and that's the rest is history.
So tell us about the transition from your corporate job to IMG Academy, and then from IMG, where you're working with mostly high school age kids, to professional baseball. Like that
Yeah.
had to be a very interesting change. Both of those changes had to be very interesting. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, through my grad school work, like I did a lot of applied experience. So I worked at a D3 college with a football program. I worked at a high school team with for a football program. I worked with a international German international school out in California virtually. Did a couple workshops with them. But at the end of the day, through my training and was very fortunate enough to go work down at the IMG Academy. It was um, an incredible experience. Absolutely love, the people there, the place there is incredible, and just the potential to do the work there is top notch. I
Yeah.
mean, it is the Disney World of youth sports. So when it comes to mental performance, it's just such a cool place to obviously like support and help, young impressionable athletes, but also kind of hone in your skills. So it was like for me,
Yeah.
anywhere I'm going and working, I want to get good and want to get better and to be able to better support whoever I'm working for. I was kind of the same in the corporate
Yeah.
world where I was there transitioning down to IMG Academy, and that's still something that I hold near and dear to my heart here in
Yeah.
professional baseball. But in terms of the
Yeah.
transition, I would say obviously like the populations are different. Like like concepts remain the same. Like performance is
Right.
performance. I talk with
Yeah.
our 24-year-olds here and with the Rays about similar things I did with some of the youth athletes too at IMG.
Yeah.
And obviously there's difference in environments and context and sports and developmental age is something you got to factor in as well. But
Right.
there were a lot of similarities too.
Usually my first point of contact is a parent who comes to me and says, oh, my child really needs to work with a mental performance coach. And I always say, I need to have a discovery session with your child, because if that kid is not bought into this process, if they don't see the value of mental performance training, it is a waste of money. When you're at IMG Academy, I'm curious, most of those kids have made such commitment to their sport. Are they pretty bought into the mental side of training already?
I would say it falls under the equation of any large group that you're working with. Like there's going to be, say ballpark 10% of the room that like, no matter what you say, they're going to love it. Like they are so bought in that you could be speaking gibberish and they're going to clap and they're going to be super pumped about it. That's just the reality. There's going to be another 10% at the bottom that no matter what you say, they're going to be completely checked out and they don't really care. Maybe you caught them on a really bad day. Like there was just situations and circumstances that led to them having, maybe a poorer experience. And that's a group that's going to happen. We want to minimize that group as much as we possibly can in reality, but it's really hard. There's just going to be that.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, there's about whatever it is less. I'm not a great math guy, but I'm going to say around 80%, where like 40% is like, you've got a really good chance at moving them up to that upper portion, where if you execute well, you could kind of, do your thing a little bit, do what you need to do. And they're going to buy in. They're leaning more towards that. And then there's the bottom 40% that's like, all right, I got to bring my A game and make sure that I get this group up towards that top percent.
And then what are your sort of go-to strategies?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that you can kind of, I guess, sell mental performance. Like using, when you work with youth athletes, like using examples of athletes in their sport domain talking about the concepts that we talk about is huge. I would use, a lot of different medias and stories of, if I'm working with a group of basketball players, like I'm bringing in Kobe Bryant, I'm bringing in LeBron James, like when I'm working with football players, like I'm bringing in Tom Brady, I'm bringing in, the big names that they know that can really sell the work for me. Like I don't necessarily have to do it if we've got, the greatest of all time talking about, the importance of this kind of work of meditation, mindfulness. And now all of a sudden the whole room's like, all right, cool, I'm down. Like,
That's
exactly. So I'm not ignorant to the fact that those voices are much more influential than mine at times. But along with that, there are a few, I would say, kind of activities that pretty sell that really well. This is one, shout out Lindsay Hamilton. I got this from her down at the IMG Academy. Incredible practitioner. But what you do in a room full of people is you give each person a sticky note. And on that sticky note, you have them write down, and I guess you can kind of do this too, write down one thing that you would need for this upcoming season to reach your full potential. Like, what is one thing? You can only choose one. And I'll give them a few moments to kind of think and write it down on a sheet of paper. And then in the front of the room, or if you're virtual, you can kind of do this in the chat too. But I prefer the in-person. If you're on the room and you got a big whiteboard, you write down at the top of the whiteboard, like mentality and mental, and you underline it. And then on the other side of the whiteboard, you write physical. And I say, all right, everyone with your sticky note, I want you to stand up and I want you to come place your sticky note underneath the category that you think your thing or your skill or quality that you pick falls under.
Okay.
And everyone stands up and goes, puts a sticky note, and you quickly realize that 100%, usually it's around 99 to 100% of people stick their sticky note underneath the mentality and mental piece.
Really? I would have guessed the other way around. Wow. So like, tell me some of the things your fellow athletes will say they need to do to level up.
Yeah. So a lot of it, confidence, focus, attention to detail. optimism and positivity is one that comes up a lot.
Okay.
So yeah, you would think that it sometimes would end up being the other way around. I did it in a room full of 110 football players, and 98% of them were under the mentality and mental piece. And there are
Wow.
two of them that are
Wow.
on the physical piece. Yeah.
Wow. It's so funny because I would have thought, I always heard from football players, I want to get bigger, faster, stronger. But
You'd think.
that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what are some of the biggest mindset hurdles you've seen with athletes transitioning to the next level?
Yeah, I think at a foundational level, and this is something that I work with a lot of our athletes on, is sort of our routines. And I think it's incredibly important to think about those things as we're
Yeah.
transitioning from different areas and contexts, especially like the high school to college transition as a freshman is extremely difficult. And I think one of the largest contributing factors to that difficulty is such a drastic change in your daily life and your routines. And
Right.
all
Yeah.
bleeds into obviously like your sport routines as well. So like we were kind of talking a little bit about before we started the show, like how important or how much these skills are transferable into everyday life.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest things for some of those people is like, okay, like being able to help support, those athletes really solidify, okay, what is your new normal? What is your new routine? How do you like when you wake up in the morning, like what do you do now that you're not at home? And, mom might have made you breakfast every single morning for your entire life up until that point. And there's such a transition period in creating that new systems and routine.
The brain loves predictability, right? It loves predictability in life, not just on the field. So I think, would you say that just understanding, having clarity over those routines of what your new normal is really one of the most transformative skills that you see in athletes when they make that jump and they're successful?
I would say it's one of the more important ones for sure. Just
Okay.
as you're initially in that transition piece, because that frees you
Yeah.
up to do a lot of things that you want to do, like perform and play free
Right.
and be in the moment.
Right.
I think that helps out a lot.
I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't ask you about failure. And so sports is it's all about failure, right? It's not about,
Mhm.
the champions are the people who don't fail. They're the people who come back from failure the quickest, right? They recover. So how do you help your clients or your athletes redefine or reframe failure so that it becomes fuel rather than something to fear?
We talk a lot about failing forward and using failure as sort of those stepping stones. And a question I'll ask kind of larger groups is just like a thought provoking question is like, what if I told you you were 30 failures away from being where you want to be? Like, how quickly would you fail?
Would you fail out?
And it's not just about, blindly failing and checking a box in that sense, but it's also having the systems around you to fail forward. It's not just a mindset, but
Right.
it's also having sort of the systems around you. And whether that's the coaches around you to be able to help support that, whether that's the environment you have in terms of your training, or is that a routine of reflection. And, after these failures, like we have certain things that we can ask ourselves that can help us move forward through that. So a couple of the common
Right.
ones that I've used is like a well, better, how approach. After a performance, and if it was less than ideal, like, all right, what went well? Because it's incredibly important to still be able to hunt positive things and performances, even in the face of failure. What could have gone better? Obviously, that's the failure itself. Looking at it as more of facts, not feelings. So like
Right.
we don't want to reflect on what could have gone better with your feelings. We want to look at that in the sense of like, all right, what are the actual facts of what could have gone
Right.
better?
Objective.
Yep. And then the last piece is how do we move forward through this? Like based
Yeah.
on what could have gone better, how are we going to move forward and develop in the way we want to? And those are the
Yeah.
three simple questions that give you a
And that-
system of failing forward.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you work with high school, college, pro, elite athletes, not so elite athletes. You work with entrepreneurs and business people. What would you say is the common trait, the most common trait or traits of people who truly thrive and who truly become peak performers?
I want to give you 5 because I think it's super important. And we're talking about elite competitors, right? So I frame these 5 things as like separators. Like when all physical things are
Okay.
equal, everything along those
What
lines, like
separates?
these are the
Yes.
separators of like who is performing better or not in that context. And number 1 is self-awareness. Again, like really, really, really strong sense of who you are as a performer, as an athlete, when you're at your best, when you're outside of at your best. Like the only way to get ourselves back into our lane is to be able to identify when we're out of it. And that requires self-awareness. Awareness is the only reason we are able to create tools and routines to help them out,
Right.
and to get them into their ideal competitive state. Number 2 is something I talk about a lot, presence. So that is, the old adage of being where your feet are. I think you can boil down high performance very simply to just focusing on the right thing at the right time. Which is something that we're always constantly striving for. I would say the 3rd thing is ruthlessly optimistic. They hunt the good things as best as they possibly can. That's
Growth
not
mindset.
100%. It's not ignorant to things that aren't going well and things that we need to grow and develop in, but that is in the face of those things and with the understanding that those are there. There's this just ruthless optimism about their path in life, their performance ahead of them, and where they are in the moment. Number 4, I'm going to go with disciplined. And I'm going to say disciplined is greater than motivated. And this might be a little
I
bit
just
of
did a podcast. I just did a podcast. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline is there
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about like facts and feelings. I think motivation is a feeling when discipline is an action. And,
Really?
I'll like say this is that like your measure of discipline is not what you're doing in the convenient moments, but it's what you're doing in the hard moments and when you don't
Mhm.
want to. And when you're just relying heavily on motivation, you're kind of pushed around by the wind, but discipline, you're 1 foot in front of the other, no matter what storms around you. Which I think again, a separator of elite athletes. And then I'll finish with the last one. Just incredibly great teammates. They are truly great teammates and want what's best for the people around them because they know that that's going to make them better.
Right.
You throw every cliche at the book at it, iron sharpens iron, and a rising tide raises all ships. Like there's a million of them, but it's tried and
Right.
true. I think it's an important one to finish with is like the great teammate piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Elliot, thank you so much for joining me today. For people listening who want to follow the work you do or connect, what's the best way to find you or connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Elliot Cox. Also Instagram, _Elliot CC. But yeah, feel
Okay.
free to reach out with any questions or
Okay.
always willing and open to have a conversation. If anyone's thinking about getting into the field, I absolutely love talking about
Yeah. Oh,
that
that'd be
as well.
great.
So yeah, always willing to find a little bit of time.
Well, thank you again for taking the time to meet with me. And to my listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share them with a teammate, leave a review, or tap a 5-star rating. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a mental workout. And on that note, this is Coach Antoinette and Coach Elliot signing off. And until next week, keep training your brain as hard as you train your body and keep pushing your limits.